Good evening and welcome to the second of our Thursday night town hall meetings. My name is Richard Tucker. I am running for the State Senate District 56 here in Minnesota, and we're having town hall meetings every Thursday night because as you all know, through this pandemic, it's very difficult to get in person to have the meetings that we'd like to have and be able to have the connection and talk to people. But we think it's important that we take the time and talk about the issues that are affecting the people in our district and around the state. And so I'm trying to have a town hall meeting every Thursday night at 7 o'clock. And so I'm glad you're here. And if you're just joining in, our issues tonight, or the issue we're going to discuss tonight, is really around the LGBTQ community and discrimination and how that impacts their lives, and what are some of the things that we need to do as we move forward to protect those rights and to ensure the equity that everybody so deserves and desires. But before we get started, one of the things that I want to talk about that has happened this week is the tragic loss of life for George Floyd, and there is tremendous anger and tremendous outrage, and I think that you're going to see over the next coming days and weeks a lot of anger come out because of the fact that this is one more time, and I understand that anger and outrage because we have been down this path too many times, and so my heart goes out to their family, and they deserve our thoughts and prayers, but they deserve more than that. They also deserve our willingness to continue to work on this issue. The systemic racism that we do have in this country is real, and we need to continue to move forward to work on that. And we will talk about that in one of the future programs. This evening, I've asked a gentleman that I've known for many years, Patrick Rubble, who's a realtor like me, but also somebody who works very much in the diversity sector, because he leads the diversity committee for the State Association of Realtors, as well as works very hard on the national side. And he comes to that because he's experienced some of the challenges of diversity as a gay man. And so we want to talk about some of those things and how we move forward on that. And so that's going to be our discussion this evening. And so with that, I'm going to bring Patrick into the conversation. And if you'll bear with me. And I should see Patrick here momentarily. There's Patrick.
Hi, how are you? Hi, Richard.
Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thanks for asking me.
This initially through housing, because that's where you and I have a common bond, and
Right.
we talked a little bit about how does this impact housing? So let's start with that part of it. What have you seen from the diversity side, as well as your own personal experiences?
Well, from a personal perspective, I've been fortunate. I grew up in a family that owned a home. I had no issue with housing around that. I was actually married to a woman when I bought my first home, so I knew how to be a homeowner. My father-in-law was a realtor, but I have seen over the years, people that have been discriminated against, and sometimes not just discriminated against, but people that are afraid to go into the process because they fear being discriminated against, whether it's real or not. A couple of facts and figures. The LGBTQ community nationally is at about under 50% home ownership. The total home ownership population is about 65% at this point. It's significantly below the national average. Yet our buying power, and I'm getting these figures through a real estate professional group that is, it's the National Association of Lesbian and Gay Real Estate Professionals. So they've done studies, they've compiled information that we find legitimate. That like I said, the buying power is about 1.2 trillion for the LGBT community. So the buying power is there, the will is there. I think 74% of those who are now renting in the LGBT community want to own a home. They want to do it in an area where they feel safe and comfortable. That's really their most motivating factor, is to feel safe and comfortable.
Well, and I think talking about that, I think one of the things that, as part of this conversation that you and I have had in the past, is there is I think a fear of the process, and what is the process like, and can I get through the process? And I think there's a feeling of even a stigma around, can I go forward and do that? I know, wasn't that long ago that it was very difficult to, even before the Marriage Act, when you had, trying to come forward as a couple to apply for mortgages or to through that process, because it's a process that was geared really towards a traditional heterosexual couple. And so as a gay couple, lesbian couple, or something like that, coming into the housing process, it really wasn't equipped to really deal with that and look at that process. And so I think there's an uncertainty and a fear around that. But it goes beyond that, I think, as well. And that's part of the conversation, is that just feeling safe within the community is a challenge and a concern.
It is, and that's one of the key considerations for, I think, the LGBT community when they're talking about buying a home is, not do I want a 1-story or a 2-story, but am I going to feel safe? Am I going to be accepted in the community, the neighborhood that I live, or choose to live?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think maybe there's a sense out there that, well, we've passed the Marriage Act and therefore we've solved the legislative problems. And one of the things that we know is that, not everything can be fixed legislatively, but I think in the sense that, we passed that and therefore let's check that box, let's move on to other issues. And I think it's important to remember that when the Gay Marriage Act was passed, the year before that, there was a tremendous amount of pressure to pass an act that would do just the opposite. And so I think it's important to recognize that there are conservative voices, particularly, as I'm running against a conservative here in this district, who was not supportive of gay marriage and was in support of a ban. And so I think it's important to recognize that these things can turn on a dime, and there's conservative pressure to roll the clock back, to move us backwards in these issues. And so I think that's important. And then for me, as someone who's running for office, that's one of the reasons I'm running for office, is to try to solidify those legislative wins, but continue to move down the path as well.
Well, and I think that, we've had conversations in the past about this, and with regard to, like you said, you pass a legislation, you develop policy, you pass legislation, and just because it passed doesn't mean that it can't be taken away.
Exactly.
I think that's always a concern, especially in the LGBT community, especially in the current environment, that those rights that we've been granted, that we've been provided, could be removed through legislation again.
Right. And so I think that's important. And again, that goes back to, from my position, one of the reasons that I'm running. One of the questions that's come up, and one of the questions that has been raised on the screen here, is where do I stand relative to conversion therapy? And you and I have had this conversation as well, but that's one of those topics where, yes, we absolutely should have a ban on conversion therapy. The damage that it does to young people, the damage that it can do to a psyche, the message that it sends that this is a mental health issue, that you can be somehow talked out of this or something, is just ludicrous. But that's, again, Dan Hall is somebody that favors conversion therapy. And I think that, again, it speaks to one of the reasons I'm running, is those are things that we have to continue to fight against.
And Richard, I've thought about that over the last several days, actually. The premise of conversion therapy is that there is a problem.
Correct.
And so when you base something that there is a problem, then I think that's a false premise, number one, within the community. It's not a problem to be gay.
That's a great way to say that, and it's absolutely true, but that's exactly what that says, is we need to convert you back to something else. And the underlying message is that, to be gay, to be trans, to be bi, to have identity questions is somehow wrong and needs to be, quote unquote, fixed. And I think you're absolutely correct. That's just, and so I think having a ban on conversion therapy from a legislative point of view is one step in that direction to go back there. But it's societal, and that's part of what you and I recognize.
And it takes time. But part of that also, and excuse me for interrupting you, is that we have to continue to have that conversation. That conversation doesn't just stop. It's a conversation that's ongoing. It's the same with what we're experiencing in the cities right now.
Well, if you go back, you and I are old enough to know, and what it was like 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and in terms of what it was like to be gay in this country, to be lesbian, to be trans in this country. And yes, we've come a long way, because you couldn't get a job, or it was, certainly discriminatory in hiring and those kind of things. And yes, we've made some changes, but to your point, we have to continue to go back to that and continue to do that. But I think that's part of it, is that within our lifetime, we've seen society become much more accepting, and their views and beliefs have become much more open, and they have moved down this path from what we were 30, 40 years ago. But to your point, we have to keep talking about this because we can go back that way.
Right.
And
I think there's a younger generation coming up behind me, several generations coming up behind me, that it's an issue.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop having the discussion.
No, and in fact, it's
educate people.
One of the questions that came up is, what informs me on this topic, and I go back and look at it from a personal experience, and obviously you have your personal experience and walked down that path, which I have not done, but I do have a very personal experience, which is something that I remember, and it has formed my thinking around this. When I was a kid, my uncle, who is gay, really struggled, because at the time it was not acceptable to come out as gay, and there was a stigma around families, and there was families would try to pretend and hide, and there was a shaming around all of that, and I had an uncle who is gay, and really struggled coming out, and I think the stress of, frankly, hiding that for a good part of his life. He was an alcoholic as a result of that. And I think once he came out, and it was, he accepted that, and also alcoholism, it transformed his life into somebody who not only was at peace with all that, but he became somebody who was just a tremendous advocate for men, both from the alcoholic side, but even more so in terms of being able to move forward as gay in a society that wasn't very accepting of that. He's just an amazing gentleman, but that was part of the struggle. And I watched him go through that struggle. And now I have a nephew who is gay, and so I know that his journey is different than my uncle's journey, simply because we're at a different point in time in our society, and thankfully we're at a different point in time in our society. But that doesn't thinking on it.
I think we can all look at our own heritage, at our own family and friends, and recognize people that are either openly gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, whatever, or that we believe were. This isn't something that just happened after the Stonewall riots in '69. The LGBT community has been around for generations, hundreds of years. Again, this is not something that's brand new, but we've moved forward through discussion. We've moved forward through policy development. And we have to continue that.
We have to continue that. And so if you're just joining us, my name is Richard Tucker. I'm running for the District 56 State Senate. My guest is Patrick Rubble. And we're talking about issues related to the LGBTQ community, and particularly around discrimination and some of the other things. We started out talking about it related to housing, but also just what are some of the other challenges and concerns as we look forward to 2021 and beyond? What are some of the other challenges that the community is going to face? Some of which can be addressed legislatively, some not. Some are things that just need to be, people need to see leadership stepping into and supporting of these communities as well. And I think if that's part of it, it isn't just we passed a bill or something, but it is also recognizing that that our leadership leads in this way as well.
And I would say also, if I don't listen, I don't learn. So I think it's important that we all listen and hear people and learn from them. We may not agree, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but I can't not agree with something if I'm not hearing what they have to say.
I'm glad you said that, because to me, that is simply one of the most important aspects of running for office, is to say, listen, I have a certain set of parameters. I have walked a certain journey in my life, a certain background that is not the same as everybody else. And I certainly know and recognize that. And so I may not see the world through somebody else's eyes and what some of the challenges that they may experience. And so you're absolutely right. You have to listen. You have to, be willing to recognize that you may not have experienced it, but it's very real. It's somebody else's experience. And how do I understand that without asking great questions, asking people to share those, be open to listening to that. And to your point, you may not always agree, but I think if you don't at least have the willingness to ask the questions, to listen to people, to engage in the dialogue, and not to get too far off track. But that's one of the challenges I see, not just in running for office today, but as I look at the legislature, the inability of the House or the Senate and the House and the Republicans and Democrats to almost be in the same room and have a civil conversation to some level. I think this year was a little bit better than some of the past years, but that is really fundamentally one of the problems, is that we're not willing to say, share with me your perspective, and how did you arrive at, how did you do that? What informed you on that? And be willing to understand that it may not be yours, but it doesn't mean that it's not right. And so I think that's part of that. One of the other questions that has come up that I think, and you had raised this to me in a conversation earlier, in terms of homelessness.
Yes, it is homelessness among the LGBT community is very large problem. It's a growing concern. Young people that are living at home that come out to their families sometimes don't have acceptance and are either forced out or choose to move from that environment, and they're moving into homelessness. They have nowhere to go. And so it's a population that needs to be addressed and helped. And that can be through legislation, but again, it's more than just legislation.
You're absolutely correct. It's more than just legislation. I know that there are some nonprofits and even some faith-based organizations that are working in that space to try to create safe environments, as well as places for young people to be able to go and be part of that. Because you're right, that is a problem. I mean, clearly we have a homelessness problem overall, but this special segment of it is something that does need a special attention. And again, if you don't walk down that path, you don't know that. And so you have to listen and be able to understand that, yeah, these are other challenges that exist, and here's why.
Right.
We move forward
homelessness, abuse, fear, shame, all of those things play into the LGBT community.
Well, and I agree with it. And it's very interesting. You talk about identity politics and some of the challenges around that. I have a very good friend of mine who has a son, and I use the word son because as a young woman, or as a girl, female, and has identified as a male, and is going through that. And we've had some very candid conversations about that, and he shared with me just the tremendous anguish that he has gone through to get to this point, and the difficulties of just trying to go to school through that transition and all of that. And part of there is surgery that at 18 he will be able to undergo. And one of the concerns you talk about legislatively is the Senate trying to push that out further to age 25, because the feeling is that people would be, it's a rush to do that when they're young. And talking to him and listening to him and the challenges that his son is going through, it's heartbreaking. And it's clear that pushing it up to 25 isn't helping them. It's just trying to appease a different group in society.
It's just pushing it off is what it is. Think about the courage, and this is so important to me, the courage that it takes for that individual and that parent and that family to be able to have those discussions and to be able to work work with everybody to make sure that they're still loved. That's what it comes down to. They're still loved.
Right. Because as a parent, that's a journey that you haven't, probably gone down, but your child goes through this journey, and you're not sure how to react. You're not sure, you love them, but you're not sure what's right. How do I do this? You need help. You need support. You don't need stigma. You don't need shaming. What you need is people to say, this is an experience. It's very real. And this is where you can reach help and understanding and support for your child who's going through this. And I know for him, he's very open about the conversation, but that didn't happen overnight. It wasn't easy. And so these are very real.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to try to pretend that they're not, or that we're going to stuff this down and we're going to say, put that off till you're 25. It's nonsense. These are very real scenarios and challenges that people with identity issues, and I shouldn't use the word issues, but identity questions go through. And I think we have to understand that and be open to that and recognize the support that they need as they go down this path and down this journey.
And you use the word journey, and that's exactly what it is. And not just in the LGBTQ space, but in society, in our world, it's all about the journey.
Well, and to that point as well, it's a journey where people expect and have the right to expect equity.
Yes.
And I think part of the is that I fully recognize, as a white heterosexual male, my journey is different than a lot of people, and I get that. I look around and recognize everybody else deserves that same level of equity and has every right to demand it of society and demand it of their elected officials. And so I think it's important that we be clear on that and recognize that, as you said, some of that's legislative, some of that's just leading to that and letting people know this is where I stand on these particular issues. And so I think that's important as well.
Right.
If you're just joining us, I just want to take a second. I'm Richard Tucker. I'm running for District 56 State Senate seat. And so one of the things I do want to remind everybody is that this is a primary election, and the primary is August 11th. The voting begins June 28th, and you can do mail-in balloting. And so I would encourage you to consider doing that. And you can go to my website, Tucker4Minnesota Senate.com, and there's a page there as to the link to the Secretary of State's office to request a ballot. And so I would encourage you to request the primary ballot, and I would encourage you to vote for me in the primary. I could also use your support, and so you can also donate on the website as well. And so I would certainly encourage you to do that as well as we move forward. We really do need to stay focused on defeating Dan Hall, because these issues that we're talking about here tonight are issues that, quite frankly, he is on the opposite side of from where I sit on these issues. And so if these are issues that are important to you, I would strongly encourage you to reach out, get a ballot, vote in the primary, and then obviously vote in the general election as well. But this is really important, and these are the issues that I think we need to discuss in District 56. So I welcome your comments, your questions. Certainly reach out to me. The website has a link to email me, and I would certainly love to hear from you and continue to talk about these issues. Patrick, I thank you for joining me this evening for our conversation on this topic. And this is, as you said earlier, this is not just a one and done. This is an ongoing conversation that we have to continue to move the ball down the field and continue to talk about on an ongoing basis.
And it's not going to be always easy either. So
and it's not always going to be easy. You're absolutely correct. And we're going to have some struggles down the road, I'm sure. We've made progress, but there's still a long way to go. And we just, as you said, need to keep talking about it and not move on to other things, but stay focused on this as well. So, Patrick, I this evening for spending some time with me and
thank you for having me,
sharing your experiences, and we look forward to continuing to do that. With that, folks, I'm going to say goodnight and thank you, everybody. And tune in next Thursday at 7 o'clock for our next conversation, and we'll be posting that out shortly. Thank you very much. Patrick, good evening. Have a great weekend.
You too.
I'm going to end this.